Good morning. Welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And as just suggested, this program is called Morning Musings. Let me remind you that I produce videos basically 5 days a week to be found on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, look up Morning Musings by Don K. Preston or Don K. Preston Morning Musings. There are literally, almost 2,000 videos there, all free of charge, and you will find there an absolutely incredible resource for the study of end times, for the study of Bible prophecy. Now, a notification here. I've already shared this with you, but I think it's important that you know this. I was not raised believing what I believe now. I was raised as a fifth-generation member of the Churches of Christ. That means I was raised as an amillennialist. I even held formal public debates from the amillennial position. But it was partly, at least, partly due to my research and my preparation for those public debates that caused me to begin to challenge and to begin to wonder if my traditions were wrong. And listen, that's difficult, okay? I understand that's really, really difficult to be able to be confronted with the possibility that everything that mom and dad, everything that grandma and grandpa, everything that my ministers, professors, etc., everything they had told me about Bible prophecy was in fact not true. That was a stunning, challenging, painful, I would even use the word traumatic experience. But my allegiance and my dedication is to the Bible. It is to the Word of God. My allegiance, my fidelity is not in tradition. It is not in men's commentaries. My only desire is to know Christ, His Word, His heart, His mind. And so when I began to encounter those challenges to my traditional views, I was literally humbled before the throne of God. I had to make some very difficult decisions. And what I'm sharing with you here on my morning musings, as I share a cup of coffee with you, hope you got some coffee, hope you have your Bible, hope you have your notebook. What I'm sharing with you in these programs is the result of years and years and years of study, over 40 years of study, research, reading scholarship, digging deep into Hebraic thought, trying to understand what the Bible meant to its original audience. Then, once determining that original meaning, to determine what it means for us today. And I would say this, unless we know what it meant, we cannot know what it means. Let me share with you very, very quickly before I get into the meat of my presentation this morning. Some years ago, I was online on the computer in a discussion forum. We were discussing, and by the way, the discussion was among Master of Divinity students at a major Christian university. We were discussing the meaning of the parables. I kept writing that it is absolutely imperative that we understand what the parables meant to the very first century generation of the Jewish listeners. this one Master of Divinity student finally chimed in. He and I had gone back and forth for a while. And he finally chimed in and he said, honest to goodness, these were his words. It's paraphrased, but it's what he was saying. I do not care about the original meaning of the parables. I could not care less. I am only concerned with determining the application that I can make today. What is the pastoral application today? And I responded and I said, with all due respect, unless and until we know what those parables meant to the original audience, we cannot make a proper, a true, and objective application for ourselves, a pastoral application for ourselves today. He reiterated, I do not care about the original meaning of the biblical text. I'm only interested in determining how I can apply it today. I must say to you, as kindly as possible, that's not proper biblical scholarship. That is a misuse of biblical exegesis. In fact, it's a total abuse of exegesis and hermeneutic. And so what I'm trying to share with you on this program is how to determine the proper meaning of the biblical text. And specifically, we've been looking at the challenge of Christ. Remember, this is by way of refreshment. Jesus said, if I do not do the works which my Father has given me, do not believe me. Do not believe me for my words' sake. Believe me for my works. Do you know I've actually had people tell me, I don't care about that passage. That's right, I've had people tell me that. How can we not care what Jesus said? Well, anyway, here is the challenge of Christ. We are supposed to be able to look at what He said He would do, when He said He would do it, and to know and to be able to demonstrate that what He said He was going to do, when He said He was going to do it, came to pass, and without being able to demonstrate that, Jesus said, don't believe in me. Don't believe me at all. Do you realize and do you catch the power of that? That means that while most assuredly we can look at the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead and know that He is the Son of God, guess what? That's not the only prediction that He gave. He said, the Son of Man will come in the glory of the Father with His angels, and shall reward every man according as his works. And verily I say unto you, there are some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in the kingdom. You see, that's every bit as much of a prophecy of what He was going to do, when He was going to do it, as His prediction concerning His death, His burial, and resurrection. Now, if we're not supposed to believe in Jesus unless He truly was crucified, buried, and resurrected on the third day, after all, He said, don't believe me for my words, believe me for my works. So if we're not supposed to believe Jesus, if He was not truly crucified, buried, and resurrected, then are we not likewise not supposed to believe in Him if He did not come in the lifetime of that first century audience? Do you see how Jesus' own words put the foundation of our faith of necessity in the past fulfillment of His predictions of His coming in judgment, His coming in the kingdom? Do you see that? This is so powerful and it's so important. Well, we have been looking at, I've been sharing with you, what did Jesus mean when He said He was going to come in the glory of the Father? I've shared with you that scholarship, to a great extent, is agreed that in the glory of the Father means He was going to come as the Father had come. I've been illustrating and demonstrating and sharing with you how the Father had come in judgment many times in the Tanakh, that is, in the Old Testament. And yet, here in Matthew 16, 27 and 28, we're commonly told, well, here's Jesus predicting his coming at the end of time as a 5'5" Jewish man in a physical body, riding on a physical cloud. And yet, that's not how the Father had come. The Father came riding on a swift cloud when he destroyed Egypt at the hand of the Assyrians. The Father came in the day of the Lord, in the destruction of Babylon and the Babylonian kingdom at the hand of the Assyrians, and later the Medes and the Persians, Isaiah 13. We have seen that the Lord came, the Father came in flaming fire with a shout. He came out of heaven in the defense of Jerusalem against the Assyrians when Yahweh sent his angel through the camp of the Assyrians, Isaiah 37:38, and in one night destroyed 185,000 of them. And yet, Yahweh did not come in flaming fire with a literal shout, did not literally, visibly, and bodily come out of heaven. You know how I know that? Because in the parallel passages to Isaiah 37:38, found in the book of 2 Kings, none of the inhabitants of Jerusalem knew what had happened until they woke up the next morning and they realized, where are the Assyrians? You look out at their camp and there's no one there. There are no soldiers milling around. There is no preparation for war. And finally, some men who were desperate because they were so hungry, they decided to go out, and basically they said, well, you know, if we stay here, we're going to die. If we go out there, we're going to die, so what does it matter? They went out there and discovered all the dead bodies. Now, wait a minute. The Lord said he was going to come in flaming fire. He said he was going to come with a shout. Said he was going to come in a hailstone. Don't you think that the inhabitants of Jerusalem, if that language was to be fulfilled literally in flaming fire with a shout and with a hailstone, don't you think the inhabitants of Jerusalem would have known that the Lord came out of heaven in flaming fire and with a shout? Yet they had no idea what had taken place. Once again, I'm sharing with you what is known as Hebrew or Hebraic apocalyptic language. This language was never intended to be taken literally. Just this morning on Facebook, I was reading a commentary by an individual. I won't call any names. And they said, well, we know that Jesus will come in glory with his angels and gather the elect. And even though Matthew 24, verse 34 said it was going to happen in that generation, we know that it didn't. So that therefore means it's our generation. Do you see the presuppositions at work here? Do you see the a priori views that are at work here? This is an individual, well-intentioned, I'm sure. This is an individual, honest, I'm sure. This is an individual that obviously has no clue about the nature of prophetic language. They have evidently never read these Old Testament prophecies about the day of the Lord and how God used this nation to destroy that nation. And when he used this nation to destroy that nation, it was said that he came. He came on the clouds. He came with fire. He came with a shout. Remember? Okay. Well, I want now to turn from Isaiah 30 to 38. And I want to go to another passage that is inserted here. But it's totally relevant, and that's Isaiah chapter 34. I've got to tell you, in my study years and years ago, this is one of those passages that when I began to look at it comprehensively, when I began to look at it historically, when I began to look at it within its context, I mean, I was literally blown away. Because, once again, I was raised believing that the day of the Lord, the day of the Lord's wrath, the time of the destruction of heaven and earth, that had to be the end of time. It just had to be. So when I came to Isaiah chapter 34, I'm going, well, whoa, wait a minute. This cannot be taken literally. Now, I don't know if I'm going to have enough time in this morning's video to finish our study of Isaiah chapter 34 or not, okay? I'm going to do my best to compact it so that you can consider it all at one time. If not, you'll just have to wait until next week where I can conclude it. But when we look at Isaiah chapter 34 and what it predicts, when we compare the language of Isaiah chapter 34 with the traditional literalistic view of the day of the Lord and the passing of heaven and earth, the earth burning up, we will find immediately, if we're going to be honest with the text, we will find immediately that, as a matter of fact, we cannot take the language literally. Now, I hope you have your Bible. Do you? Hope you have your notebook. Do you? So, let's begin reading Isaiah chapter 34. Verse 1. Come near, you nations, to hear, and heed, you people. Let the earth hear, and all that is in it, the world and all things that came forth from it. For the indignation of the Lord is against all nations, and his fury against all their armies. He has utterly destroyed them. He has given them over to the slaughter. Their slain shall be thrown out. The stench shall rise from their corpses. Now watch this language. The mountains shall be melted with their blood. All the host of heaven shall be dissolved. The heavens shall be rolled up like a scroll. All their hosts shall fall down, as the leaf falls from the vine, and as fruit falling from a fig tree. For my sword shall be bathed in heaven. Wait a minute, I thought all this was going to take place on earth. Now, look very carefully at the language. All the nations. Does that mean every single nation on earth? Well, that's the way the literalistic and dispensational view of things takes the language. Well, as we will see, that doesn't work. That is not taking the text in its context. It is not a holistic interpretation, as we will see. For the indignation of the Lord is against all nations, his fury against all their armies. Now watch, he has utterly destroyed them. Well, if we're going to take the language literally, then it's already been done. But no, this is what is known in both the Hebrew Old Testament and the Greek New Testament as a proleptic statement. Now, what in the world is a proleptic statement? Well, a proleptic statement is a statement that is given as a fact, sometimes even a past fact, that has not yet taken place, but is so sure to take place that it is stated as a current or a past reality. Now, let me give you a prime example of that. In Isaiah 53, Isaiah 53, in one passage and one verse after another, it says, He has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Oh, wait a minute. That's a prediction of Jesus, who would not come for over 600 years, 700 years. Now, wait a minute. It's given in the past tense, but again, this is what is known as the prophetic past tense. And it is prolepsis. It's based upon what God Himself said in Romans chapter 4, verse 17. And I'm not going to quote it. I want to turn there and I want to read it for you because this is such an incredibly powerful statement, an incredibly powerful principle that we find throughout the Old Testament and even in the New. Okay? In Romans 4, Yahweh is speaking of the promises that He made to Abraham. In you and in your seed shall all nations of the earth be blessed. And that promise was given before the law entered, before any of Torah was given. I'm going to begin reading with verse 16. Therefore it, that is the promise that God was going to bless all the nations in Abraham, therefore it is of faith that it might be according to grace, so that the promise might be sure to all of the seed, not only to those who are of the law, but also to those who are of the faith of Abraham. So here we have the promise of Abraham would be to those who are the physical lineage of Abraham, i.e. the 12 tribes of Israel, but also it would be to any and all who had the faith of Abraham. In other words, this is salvation that would be offered to all men, both Jew and Gentile, not just the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, now notice this. As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations. Now, wait a minute. God said that before Abraham had ever produced Isaac and Jacob became Israel. See, God says, I have made you the father of many nations. And yet the 12 tribes had not even become a reality at all. Now watch this, to continue. I have made you a father of many nations in the presence of him who he believed. God, who gives life to the dead, watch this now, here's the proleptic principle, or the principle of prolepsis, and calls those things which do not exist as though they did. Watch. I have made you, past tense, the father of many nations. But wait. The many nations had not yet come to exist. Do you see that? That's powerful stuff. So, when we go back here to Isaiah chapter 34, and we see Yahweh saying, listen to me, all of you nations, all of you armies, I've destroyed them all. Well, it hadn't happened yet. But it was so sure to happen. Oh, and by the way, He doesn't yet tell us when it would happen. He just said it was going to happen. Now, I'm running out of time very, very quickly. They're slain. The slain of whom? The nations and the armies. Their slain shall be thrown out. Their stench shall rise from the corpses. Now watch this. The mountains shall be melted with their blood. Now, a lot of people try to correlate that with Revelation chapter 14 and the shedding of the blood throughout the land, the blood that would rise to the horses' bridles. No, sorry, it doesn't apply to that. Exaggerated, hyperbolic language. Now watch this. At the destruction of all these nations, at the destruction of all of their armies, the host of heaven shall be dissolved, and the heavens shall be rolled up like a scroll. All the host of heaven shall fall down as the leaf falls from the vine and as the fruit falling from a fig tree. My goodness gracious, this sounds like the end of time. After all, if all the host of heaven, that's the sun, the moon, and the stars, are going to fall down, the heaven itself will be rolled up like a scroll. It's got to be the end of time, right? Well, it sure sounds like it. If we're raised in the Alexandrian and Grecian worldview of taking language literally, instead of acknowledging, instead of realizing that Hebraic prophetic apocalyptic language is simple exaggeration. It's mental imagery is what it is. You see, the Hebraic prophets were trying to convey a mental image of how awful, how catastrophic the events that they're talking about really were for the people of their time. And it's not talking about the end of time. Now, let me say this. It most assuredly was, listen to me very carefully. Number one, it was not the end of time, but it was the time of the end for the nations that he's talking about, and in specific terms for the nation that he is talking about. Now, pay very, very close attention. At this time of the destruction of the armies, at this time of the destruction of the nations, at this time of the slain of the earth being so great that their blood would melt the heavens, that the host of heaven would fall down. At that time, notice that connective particle, for my sword shall be bathed in heaven. Indeed, it shall come down on Edom and on the people of my curse for judgment. The sword of the Lord is filled with blood. It is made overflowing with fatness, with the blood of lambs and goats, with the fat of kidneys. For the Lord has a sacrifice and a great in Bozrah, and a great slaughter in the land of Edom. Folks, you've got to catch the power of this. This language of the destruction of heaven and earth, this language of the destruction of all of the nations, this destruction of the cosmos, this language is given in the context of the destruction of ancient Edom. Now here's a clue to lead us into next week. Edom no longer exists. We're going to develop that next week, so I'll see you then.